everyone. All right, welcome back here. Chapter 14, Part 2. We're going to talk here about the stages of learning how to trade, of course, with a focus on this part up here, the emotions. All right, so the topics of this section, number 1, the competency spectrum. Number 2, self-evaluation. And number 3, the keys to advancing. So Ted and Diane are with me, and I'm going to let them go ahead and jump in here with where are you in learning to trade?
All right, so we have a lot of questions here. So where are you in learning to trade? When you think about the level you're at, how does that influence how you think you should be trading? How you view your rules, adherence to your rules, expectations for yourself, judgment of the market, judgment of yourself. When you think about your trading, how do you think about your goals, choices, and outcomes? What do you consider a success? How do you meet yourself emotionally when you fail? So these are all, a lot of times, traders that I've talked to, the tendency to just, figure out a few skills and just jump in and start trying.
Yeah.
And the way that leads to a lot of mistakes and unfortunate losses.
Yeah.
A big part of this segment is, we're hoping to get students to really start asking themselves these questions, to really begin to look at where they are on a particular spectrum in this whole process, really seeing this as a journey.
Mm-hmm.
So, you want to go ahead and...
Yeah, go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So in this next slide, we're talking a lot about the levels of competency, and these are true for learning anything. When you first begin something, you are unconsciously incompetent at the yellow level at the bottom. You don't know what you don't know about trading, for example. You might think that you know more than you do, and this is a place where you might make some mistakes. Moving up to the red level, consciously incompetent, you know that you don't know how to do certain things, and it bothers you. And so this is a place where you might feel actually pretty frustrated, like, am I ever going to figure this out? There's so many things to pay attention to. There's so many things I don't know.
Yeah.
Or you might have already been hit with some mistakes and some losses and really beginning to question,
Sure.
What am I doing?
I even feel this way at times
Right.
when I trade outside my strategy.
Yep.
Right.
Because within my strategy, I'm pretty competent, consciously and even unconsciously. But when I try to trade outside my strategy, like if I try to trade options, or I try to trade the S&P 500 or the VIX or something like that, or I try to dabble in the large caps, I get frustrated because I feel like I'm bothered because I feel like there's potential there, and I just don't quite have a dial on it.
Well,
The point that you make is a really good one. We actually talked about this in one of our last FOMO sessions. We had a bunch of the junior moderators on, and we talked about how when circumstances change, and that could be trading outside of your strategy, it could also be how the market is very volatile right now, and it's not something that some of the newer traders are used to. When there are those kinds of changes and shifts, even if we're at a level of consciously competent or unconsciously competent, we will often dip back into these levels, typically consciously incompetent. And we can really feel what we don't know. We really and experience that emotionally as well. So even though this is kind of a nice little stair step going up and up to the top, we will have circumstances that bring us back down into the dipping into these levels, and it's really important to be aware of that. When we get to the green level, consciously competent, you understand how to trade, but it takes a lot of effort and focus. And that's the level my daughter is at with driving right now. She goes to driver's ed and drives for 2 hours, and she's like, I'm exhausted.
Right.
Because it takes so much mental effort to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in trading, what was your experience with that?
Well, as I first got started, I was unconsciously incompetent, and I did what a lot of people do, which is I just sort of started buying some stocks, penny stocks that I was getting emails about. And I was like, okay, these are buy alerts, they're a hot penny stock going to 100 or whatever, I'll just buy it. And I made some money on some of them, but pretty quickly I went into consciously incompetent, realizing that there was more to know, and that I wasn't there because I wasn't making money consistently. consciously competent is the area where I sometimes feel like I'm spending a lot of energy trying to follow my rules and not dip into the areas outside my strategy where I get into trouble. And unconsciously competent, where I'm fully in the zone, I feel like I only get there when I'm in the middle of a hot streak, a few days into a hot streak where everything's working, and I'm just have a little window where I'm super dialed in. I've got confidence, the market's hot, and I can just really come in, do my thing, and come out doing really well.
Yeah.
So I would say I definitely actively dip between the top three levels, although I probably spend most of my time in the green level.
Right.
If I was to, and that may not be totally true, but that's how I interpret it.
Right. And other people might look at you and might think that you're in that blue level more of the time than you feel.
Constantly, unconsciously confident.
people might look at you and think that.
Sure.
Right.
But even when we are in the unconsciously competent stage of something, it depends on what that something is. Trading is something that is so complex,
Right.
That it's more likely that there are certain aspects of it that you're unconsciously competent with, and then there are others where you
maybe so
that bring you into. But that's probably a pretty astute observation, and it's always good to be kind of cautious in where you see yourself. So even if the rest of us think Ross is a trading god, he's up there in the blue zone, it's good for you to have your feet more on the ground and to see the places where you dip into the others. On the side it says wrong intuition, wrong analysis, right intuition, and that leads us into the next slide, which is about the two systems of thinking.
Right, and this is the work of Daniel Kahneman, which many of you may know his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And basically he's talking about these two systems of thinking that operate within each of us. And we were alluding to this in our last segment somewhat. So system one is fast, instinctive, and emotional. System one operates automatically and quickly with little or no effort and almost no sense of voluntary control. It is impulsive, intuitive, and largely subconscious. This is the part of us that we may be experienced as effortlessness or ease, being in the zone. So when it's working really well, we're there and we don't even have to think about it. But it can also be, when knee-jerk reactions occur out of heightened emotionality, this may be experienced as the stranger within. This is the, why did I just do that?
Right.
We're operating in this system one level of thinking.
Right.
So system two level of thinking is much slower, deliberative, and logical. System two allocates attention to more effortful mental activities like complex computations. Its operations are more often associated with the subjective experience of agency, of choice, and concentration. We tend to more identify with it as the conscious reasoning self that has beliefs, makes choices, and decides what to think about and what to do. Although both, as we were talking about in our last, we had a lot of beliefs that we carry that live in the system one level of thinking. When we think about what we identify as us, we're often thinking about system two.
Right.
Should we move into the next slide?
Well, one of the things that's important in this is that system two level of thinking takes attention and effort.
Yeah.
When we really have to think and concentrate about something, we're engaging in that system two.
Yeah.
And because of that, it is what allows us to actually notice what's happening in system one. So mindfulness practice would be part of system two. You can use it to watch system one, and then you're bringing that more into your awareness.
I see.
So we had shown this slide in the last segment, that both of these systems make decisions through these filters.
Right.
So thoughts, emotions, experience, beliefs. In the system two level, we have much more of an opportunity to actually step back and practice metacognition, of being able to really look at what is it that's occurring within us. System one is just happening so automatically that we don't tend to do that.
Right.
So this interplay between the two systems, we can really begin to look at, what are our tendencies? What are the patterns that cause me to do the things I do? And this is where, really meeting ourselves with compassion rather than, harsh judgment really comes into play. So we have this opportunity to start influencing how System 1 operates, because as we were saying, in the last segment, we spend 90% of our time operating from that place.
Yeah.
So the more time we spend, with practices like mindfulness, of really turning towards and relating to what we experience, we have a greater chance to influence what's occurring in that System 1 level of thinking.
We can practice this anytime. So I mentioned in the last segment that brushing our teeth is something that we do without thinking about it, or driving the car. We can at any time to practice mindfulness turn our attention on when we're washing the dishes or brushing our teeth or driving our car, and to really notice and engage with what we're doing as a practice that gives us an easier delivery and meditation to be able to access those kind of states.
Right.
And in trading.
Right. Yeah, when it comes to trading, it's interesting because the thinking fast, in terms of my strategy at least, some of my trades can be incredibly quick, and being able to read level 2 and see the flash of a big buyer and react to that.
Right.
That has to be a very quick decision.
Well, and that's where, when we were talking about that unconsciously competent.
Right.
Exactly.
The degree to which you have developed the muscle memory of your strategy.
Yeah.
That's so, think about the number of trades you've probably taken.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big number.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all that has gone into training yourself
Mm-hmm.
to make these really quick, right decisions. So that when you're actually on your game, there's a lot there that you can lean back on and trust.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you're staying conscious and aware,
Mm-hmm.
there's so much information that's moving through you that you're probably not even fully aware of anymore.
Right, and it would actually hinder you in that moment to try to think through it rather than intuit it.
Right.
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 Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, so once you get to that certain level, that's where, it's right intuition.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, that's what we're aiming towards here. As you're progressing in your development as a trader, so that's the goal at a pretty high endpoint.
Yeah.
Right.
Paying attention to these different stages that you're moving through,
Right.
and not expecting more from yourself than where you currently are.
Yeah.
What's the actual next step right in front of you, rather than, say, looking at Ross and thinking, I should be there.
Sure.
And that's really the point of this piece of the curriculum, is for people to kind of see where they are and to be able to keep self-evaluating, and also to know what are the tricks to get me to the next place.
Yeah,
What do I need to do cognitively, and what do I need to do emotionally?
Right. Yeah, so I would say a big part of what creates that sort of educated intuition is experience.
Yes.
Because knowledge of just reading about it, that's not experience.
Right.
So to really turn that knowledge into a skill, you have to have a lot of experience, you have to practice.
Right.
And so that's the benefit, of course, of trading in a simulator, and the fact that students are able to trade the market side by side with me without risking real money.
Exactly.
And that does have an impact on the emotions, but it can help you build that experience.
Right.
So that when you have the emotions picking up, at least you have the experience to fall back on.
Right.
If you're experiencing the emotions and you don't have the actual skills and knowledge, then
It's a disaster.
Right.
exactly.
Well, this is, it's a really good reminder of the importance of, when you are trading in the simulator, trying to do so as close to how you would trade with real money as possible.
Right.
And so at some point you might be in there and you might be trying to figure out your strategy, and so at that point you can play around with that.
Mm-hmm.
But once you really begin to settle in, getting that as close as possible so that the muscle memory you're developing actually fits what you're going to be doing once you go live.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So in the next slide, we kind of go to those levels, moving from a novice all the way to an expert level. And at that novice level, the novice needs recipes from others, right? They can't do it on their own. They don't know they're in that unconsciously incompetent place. They lack context, which is really important, and that's where we're going to talk about more of how you actually develop context. And the key is practicing, right? And there are so many pieces of Warrior that are set up to support this.
Right.
Easily derailed, lacks emotional investment, blames recipes. Well, of course, right? Because they don't know how to do it. So the recipe didn't work. It must
Right.
be the fault of the recipe.
Right.
So what is the challenge? What needs to happen at this level? Take in information, practice rigorously, following the recipes, and begin to develop the context through that practice, right? At the advanced beginner level, the person is learning when to use which recipes. So now they're starting to have more investment in this. Utilizing maxims built off situational cues. And so this is really a key when you're starting to recognize, oh, this is the setup, this is it. And before I didn't realize that, but now I do. Feeling overwhelmed by so many indicators, because this is the place where you're kind of in that trying to move from unconsciously incompetent to consciously confident, and there's so much information that it feels really overwhelming.
Yeah.
Sometimes a person could feel hopeless, like how will I ever master all of this? And how will I figure this out? Beginning to discern pertinent from extraneous information, and that part's really important. It goes to that whole situational piece. It's like, okay, this fits with this. This recipe works here. I still don't have my own recipe exactly, but I know what works where. And because there's beginning to be more responsibility of the individual, there really is more emotionality occurring, because there's more, them taking responsibility. So you need to take stock of progress and change in trading habits, meeting hopelessness with insight and compassion. And so that's the beginning of meeting yourself. So,
when we think about that consciously incompetent, that's very much in that novice stage of development.
Yeah.
You spend a lot of time, deer in the headlights. I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
And being kind enough to yourself to recognize, well, that's kind of exactly where you're supposed to be at that stage.
Sure.
This is the time to really start taking in information and not expecting very much of yourself.
Yeah.
Be patient, be kind.
So when I think about advanced beginner, I think the person, the trader, the student with warrior, is in the simulator. That's where I see them.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a student who's traded with real money and you can identify that you're in the novice or beginner stages, it can sometimes feel hard to stop trading with real money.
Right.
Most likely you will have lost money, and then you'll justify continuing to trade with real money because now you need to make the money back.
Right.
Having acceptance and being able to put those losses aside for right now, not forever, but for right now, while you focus on learning the recipe, trading in the simulator, and really moving up this ladder towards competency. It's a practice in mindfulness. It forces you to kind of go through something that a lot of traders will go through, which is to have a loss and be able to just put it aside for right now and just focus on whether it's small base hits with real money, as the case is for me, or for you as a beginner trader working your way up this competency ladder, focusing on trading in the simulator and proving that you can be profitable. If you can't be profitable in the simulator, it's not time to go back to real money yet.
Right.
So the next level is the place where somebody would hopefully, when you're at the competent level, you begin in the simulator and maybe begin to branch out into real money. But in this stage, this is the most critical stage for progressing in terms of meeting yourself emotionally. So developing your own rules and finding rules that fit situations. So this is where you really begin to take ownership of it. You're figuring out how to do it on your own here, and choosing which criteria to focus on. You're making a choice. You have more investment. So it's not just beginning to say, oh, this is what I should be paying attention to. It's saying, okay, this is what I want to look at. You're having more confidence around it, more adeptness around the changing situations. So the locus of control shifts. You experience more joy and more remorse about your choices, your successes, failures, greens, reds. And your internal criticism will definitely rise in this place. That's why you need to be able to meet yourself emotionally, to not beat yourself up. The challenge here is almost entirely emotional from the psychological perspective.
Right.
I know that there are challenges on the learning to trade side that are not psychological, but on the psychological side, that's the biggest thing, because you'll be met with internal criticism, and other people in your environment will probably exacerbate that if you're feeling a lot of internal criticism.
Mm-hmm.
So taking what's happening and thinking critically about the data rather than judgmentally about yourself.
Right.
Remembering that beat up creates burnout, so treating all your mistakes like data, something that will propel you forward.
Yes.
Right. And this is the place that can be so frustrating for many beginning traders. This is where you begin, it's like you can see the path forward and you keep missing it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You keep taking the wrong step, even though it's
Yeah.
like, I knew I was supposed to
Yeah.
move in this direction at this moment, and I just didn't.
We'll bring up here that that's what you remember, that people are very focused on all the wrong steps they take
Right.
rather than on the right steps that they might take.
Right.
Right. And so this is a really critical place to be as kind as possible. This is a really important flex point. As that last bullet point says on this column, beat up creates burnout.
Yeah.
So as you're learning this, treating all of the mistakes that you make as data points,
Right.
Incorporating that into the learning process and really practicing a lot of self-care during this process.
We often think that when we cross a threshold, I've made it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Think about my son who never slept through the night as a baby, and
Mhm.
the first time he ever did, he
Yeah.
was 3 years old. And I thought, woohoo!
Yeah.
And then the next night he didn't.
Right.
So we have that tendency, and being understanding of that and recognizing it happened once and it can happen again.
Mhm. So you want to do that? So for
No, go ahead.
proficient, by using data from mistakes and successful trades, best practices are reinforced, allowing intuition to develop, intuitive sense of what the goal should be given the situation, knows what criteria to focus on, intuits important from extraneous information, and so on. Emotional investment in good outcome and good goal setting. So in conversations I've had with traders, I begin to hear this place of like, even though it was a red trade or a red day, I still feel good about it because I followed my rules.
That's awesome.
I stuck with
Yeah.
my strategy, and I lived to fight another day.
Yes.
That's what I hear a lot, in traders moving into this place. So this, the shift to intuitive sense and investment in what goals should be. Decide what you should do about it. Think critically, not judgmentally to grow.
Mhm.
So again, that emphasis on compassionate, critical thinking.
Yeah.
Being able to really step back and in a kind way acknowledge, okay, this works, this doesn't. How do I take these steps forward, rather than either beating ourselves up or denying that there's a problem in our patterns.
And so in this place, you can allow yourself to kind of feel into things a little bit too. Because in this place, you want, the next step is more intuitive awareness. So
Mhm.
allowing yourself to feel into, especially those moments where you're like having that sense of, I got this, I know what I'm doing,
Mhm.
and to recognize the places where you have that.
Right. So do you want to do expert?
Yeah, no,
Sure. Me too?
Yeah.
Okay, so at the expert level, operates entirely by intuition flow state.
Mhm.
That's like, the pinnacle of all of this. Knows what goals should be, what to do about them, and what should happen as a result. Emotionally invested in all aspects, may have difficulty describing how or why they do what they do.
Mhm.
So, some important points, situational context, intuitive decision making, emotional investment in goals, choices, and outcomes.
Mhm.
So, as we were talking about earlier, that capacity to develop the muscle memory of good trading.
Mhm.
So much of what you are doing and are about are entering into that area of subconscious intuition.
Right.
To where you start to make really good choices and may even get to a point where you couldn't even tell someone how you're getting there. Not as I watch
Sure.
you as a trader, because you're also a teacher.
Right.
You're constantly looking at how do I describe
Yeah. Yeah.
what I do and how I do it.
Yeah. But there are times where someone will look at an entry that I took and say, why did you press the buy button there? And as I look back on the trade, sometimes there'll be something very, very minute that I saw on the level 2.
Right.
Sometimes there'll be just a momentary pause in the price action, or sometimes it feels like it is sort of an intuitive starter position.
Right.
Because I think it may be about to work. It hasn't quite yet, but it looks really close. So I have the confidence to sort of take an initial position, and then sometimes it works so quickly that I never take another. Right. So all I have is my starter, which was ultimately an intuitive entry.
Right.
And when you look back on it, it's kind of hard to say, like, this is the specific identifier that said buy.
Right.
But that's, getting to that level, is obviously a commitment of time. It's a lot of experience to be able to make that sort of intuitive decision.
So one of the other tips on moving up from like advanced beginner to proficient through any of those 3 levels is limiting the data, handicapping yourself intentionally. You probably wouldn't want to do it with real money. You would do it in the simulator.
Okay.
But handicapping yourself, and I was trying to think of like an analogy, and I was thinking back to playing pool. I'm really pretty good at pool, but like, what was a fun way to handicap myself? Okay, we'll play a game where you have to take every shot with a bridge, like whether or not you need the bridge.
Sure, yeah.
I'm wondering in trading, what would be some ways to kind of limit yourself or handicap yourself in a way so that you could get really good at specific things?
Right, working on something very specific. So like if you've identified like either a problem area or an area that you really want to improve on, what are some things that you can think of that could create that situation?
That's interesting. I suppose one might be to use stops on all your trades, live stop orders, even though I don't use them with real money, because when you use them with real money, the market makers can see your stops, and if you have a large position, you've got a live stop, then they're motivated to encourage the price to dip down to pick up your shares and then run it back up. So using a stop, however, can help address the holding too long, because as soon as it dips down, you're out. There's no thinking. It automates that portion. Another thing that I am doing right now to help slow me down is I took my hotkey off for buying. Okay. So I have to manually enter my order and press it, which I'm not sure if I think of it in the same way, but it's something that I'm doing.
But it's playing with the pieces, right? Yeah, it's working. It's trying it a different way, which is exactly what this gets at. So like, when I gave the pool analogy of shooting every shot with a bridge, it doesn't make you want to do that when you're actually playing a game.
Sure.
But in the moment when you do need to use the bridge, you've used the bridge in like every kind of situation that you could imagine using it, and you end up being a lot more familiar with it.
Right.
And this is a place of, the real value of the simulator is not just when you're in the process of learning, but even if you've switched over to live trading, if you're trying to tweak a part of your strategy, if you're trying to come up with something new, don't be afraid to just go right back into the simulator to practice it.
Yeah.
This is, as we're moving through this, and you were talking about this on the different stages of competency, with your strategy, you're in that highest level. But if you're trying to break into, another strategy, accepting, okay, I'm at a much lower stage here. Yeah. And that's okay.
And using some of the tools that Warrior has for everybody to use is a great way, to really get the most out of this, curriculum and all of the resources.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Should I go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So this is the confidence acquisition distribution, and this isn't important to spend a lot of time on, but that last slide that we looked at was the work of Stuart Dreyfus, and he was actually looking at people working in the medical community, so like doctors and nurses, and one of the people who kind of looked at other type of workers looked at programmers actually, and anybody working with like information, so information workers. And this was kind of the distribution of how it generally is, and what it really indicates is like the biggest group of people is in the advanced beginner section on this, right?
Yeah.
And so most people move from novice to advanced beginner, but a lot of people actually don't transition from advanced beginner to competent. And this seemed really relevant for something like trading, because you want to look at what makes people drop out and walk away.
Sure.
And when they did look into this, the big discovery was it was all about accepting emotional consequences. So when we talked about moving up on those levels earlier, and I said a lot of the emotional work is at that level of moving from advanced beginner to competent. In both of those, you're working a lot with beginning to really take responsibility for your actions. And the advanced beginner stage is somebody else's recipes that you're figuring out situational context. And in the competent level, you're figuring out your own pieces, your own rules, your own strategies. So in that progression, one thing that's important to keep your eye on is, somebody will say, well, I just have to get control of my emotions. Like, I don't have to, I don't need to do all these things.
Like a robot.
Yep.
But actually, the more emotional flexibility that you have, the more cognitive flexibility that you're going to have to access what you need to access to move up to those higher levels.
Right.
And, and one of the things I think about, after your comment earlier about how you feel that you're, maybe I'm more in the consciously competent most of the time.
Yeah.
Is that I think that that's true. I think that most people are not squarely in the expert all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the distribution actually reflects, that we are always shifting a little bit between these levels.
And one of the things that I've watched with, people that get stuck in the advanced beginner stage and can't move to the competent.
Yeah.
Getting caught or locked into a strategy that simply doesn't work and not being able to compassionately admit that to themselves.
Mm.
So they end up getting stuck in just repeated confirmation bias.
Yeah.
So this is my strategy, it has to work, and rather than really taking a step back and taking that hard look, they just continue to look for things that confirm the strategy so that they don't have to let go of it and just repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again and stop their advancement.
Right.
So in crossing that threshold, this is the place where it's really important to be able to step back and truly evaluate, is this working or not?
Yeah.
And if not, what else is out there?
Right. I'll say that when you and I started working together, I went through several strategies before really dialing in on something that worked.
Right.
And I had to completely let some of those go. And some of them I put a lot of work into.
Right.
I was developing all the rules of the strategy. I started writing it out. I was taking tons of screenshots about, this is when I follow the strategy and this is how it works. And I had developed a couple of my own technical indicators that would show whether or not all these things were true or false. And I was doing stuff like, I only take trades if the RSI is above this, and if the MACD is above this, and if this moving average is above this. And that was all stuff I was doing essentially to try to prevent myself from ever having a losing trade.
Right.
So that was so afraid of loss.
And what an investment.
Yeah. And it was hard to walk away from that. And then ultimately, for me, the data was what really told me that what you're doing there, and I was trying to trade options on Apple and these other stocks because they, of course, were liquid and you didn't need a lot of money to trade them. Those really weren't working consistently. Of course, if you can consistently trade Apple options, you could be a hedge fund manager because those are that you're trading some of the hardest stuff in the market.
Right.
And when I discovered that my biggest winners were on more of the small cap stocks and more of the traditional pattern breakouts, that's when I started to really find direction. So I had to let the data speak to me and take away my bias and be willing to throw out something that I had put a lot of time into and recognize that it wasn't all for nothing because it helped get me to where I am right now, which is that I'm able to see something else in front of me that might be a little bit better.
Exactly. Allowing yourself to keep evolving.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and it was that piece of, recognizing that all of that activity, all of that effort was to avoid ever having to be wrong.
Yeah.
so
was
that you
hard for
would
me.
never take a loss.
Yeah.
And so that's where, working with those emotions,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay for me to make mistakes.
Right.
It's okay to be wrong, because that's where I actually learn.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's also a component of it that out of 1,000 trades that I'll take over the next year, statistically I'll be wrong on 300 of them, 30%.
Mhm.
And there's not necessarily a lesson in each one of those losses.
That's true.
Because part of any winning strategy has a margin of error.
Right.
That you can be wrong, or you can take a loss on the strategy 30% of the time and you're still doing the right thing.
Right.
It was worth trading, it was a good quality setup, and you followed your rules by selling where you sold. This was one of the 3 out of 10 that's a loser.
Right.
Fine, let's look for the next one. But it's hard to have that confidence as a beginner when you might have only 40% or
Right.
only 50% accuracy and 50% are losers, and you're not quite dialed in enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's
Yeah.
where, as you evaluate where you are in the spectrum,
Right.
the proper risk management.
Mhm.
An idea that you and I shared many times in your own development was survive until you thrive.
Yes.
Make sure you live to fight another day.
Yeah.
Don't overextend yourself. Don't get into positions that you really can't afford to get into trying to create that really big win.
Yeah.
The base hits as opposed to only practicing home run hits.
Yeah.
Right, so it's honesty and empathy, and
Mhm.
it's that that realistic, that honesty. It makes me think about the being in that place. People especially coming for psychotherapy are like, I want to change. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
Right.
And Carl Rogers, who was a brilliant psychotherapist, said the curious paradox is it's not until I accept myself exactly as I am that then I can change.
Right.
And it's the same thing with moving through the stages. It's like really accepting where you are, accepting surviving rather than thriving
Right.
today so that you can get there.
Well, even like, the story that you were telling about your own journey, working on a strategy, putting a lot of time and effort into it, only to get to a place where I just need to toss that one aside.
Yeah.
Being
Yeah.
able to admit that to yourself, this thing that I've worked so hard on,
Mhm.
I've arrived at the place where I've discovered, wow, it really doesn't work. What else is here?
Right.
And that it wasn't worthless,
Mhm.
that it got
Right.
you to where you were. It got
Yeah.
you to that point.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the part that is so important to hold on to,
Mhm.
is the value of that experience of building,
Mhm.
Right.
and that makes you better suited for the next build, the next strategy development.
Right.
One of the reasons that we, as part of the Warrior Pro classes, have not just my class, but Mike's class and the classes on options trading and swing trading and retirement accounts and futures and stuff like that, is because we're not so confident in ourselves that we believe that one size fits all.
Right.
I'm not going to assume that every single trader is going to have the physical aptitude or the mental aptitude to trade my strategy.
Right.
It's a great strategy for me. It's a great strategy for people like me that are able to make quick decisions and are comfortable with that risk profile and everything else. But there are other traders out there, like Mike, who doesn't trade my strategy. He's got his own strategy.
Right.
And so for some students who go through the starter and go through my day trade course and then trade on the simulator for a while, they may have a point where they're like, okay, I've given it as much as I can. I've given it as much time, I've focused as much as I can. Now it's time for me to try something else because I'm not feeling comfortable. It doesn't fit.
Right.
It's just for whatever reason. And then they try Mike's strategy and some do really well. And so that's been the nice thing about having Mike's strategy is, especially a secondary one in the classes, because it has a very different sort of risk profile.
Mhm.
The trades are slower, they're not as aggressive, they're not as fast, and they allow more time to do analysis and to sort of mentally prepare for the trade, which for some people, especially who hesitate,
Right.
Right.
is a much better strategy. So,
And that's an excellent point that, people have all different personalities and,
Yeah.
and feel different,
Mhm.
feel comfortable with different things.
but it doesn't mean, just for instance, that learning my strategy would have been for nothing, because you
Right.
still would have learned
Mhm.
about level 2 and everything else. So, or if you started with Mike's and then switched to mine, that it would be for nothing, because it's part of your personal development, trading development journey.
Right. And as you move, even higher into that spectrum, getting to these places where you really start to make these strategies your own.
Absolutely, that's the ultimate.
That ultimately when you get to, the end of that growth, the end of that spectrum, even if your strategy is very similar to Ross's, even if he's been the one that you've followed, I don't think it's going to look exactly the same because you aren't the same person. You're going to make it your own. It's going to have its own personality, just like you do.
Yep.
So
that's 100% true. In the students who are in the 100K club who have become profitable, really successful, we don't trade the exact same way every day. If you look back at our trades, we may trade the same stocks on many days, but there'll be some days where I trade more than others or less than others. There's a variation, and it is ultimately about learning the recipe so well that you can create your own sort of spin on it, and this is now it's something that you really own.
Very cool.
So this is about checking in with yourself, and this this slide or this idea is a way to kind of check in periodically to go back to looking at do you know the relevant maxims depending on the context? No, if you don't, then you're a novice. If you do, you say, oh, do you know what data and input to focus on? No, if I don't know that, maybe I'm an advanced beginner. Do you intuitively know your goal, but you aren't sure how to achieve it? Okay, that's the competent level.
Yeah.
Right? You're still figuring
Right.
that out. Do you intuitively know what to do and how to do it? If not, then you're proficient. But if you do, then you're an expert. So seeing how it moves along and being able to check in.
I think that for me at times I intuitively know what to do, or maybe I don't know if intuitive is right, but I know what I should do and I choose to do something other than that.
Right.
And I think that that's kind of within that spectrum of where you are in your growth, where I feel like I'm a good enough trader that I don't have to follow the rules sometimes that I set for myself of whether it's risk tolerance or share size or max consecutive losses or whatever the case is. And that's a really tough one because I can't definitively say that I make money or lose money after breaking rules because both happen enough that I can't say for sure. And it sometimes just feels that I know that I shouldn't, but I do it anyway. So whether that makes me a proficient or an expert trader, I'm not really sure.
Go ahead.
One of the things, well, even just as we're having this conversation, the idea of trading as your best trader.
Yeah.
That there are times when you are totally in that expert zone.
Right.
Yes.
And there are times for whatever reason, you take yourself out of it. I know that, conversations we've had recently, the thing I've said is just because you can do something doesn't mean you should.
Right.
So, oftentimes that's trading in, multiple accounts, multiple stock, all at the same time while doing all the teaching.
Right.
There's only so many plates you can add or how many balls you can,
On the unicycle. Juggling and spinning
before you stop looking like the expert and start knocking yourself down the rungs.
Yep.
One of the other things that I was going to say about, if you get to that question that you're at level 4, it's not that important. It's not necessarily that important at that point to discern are you proficient or an expert.
Right.
Because when you have gotten to that point of being proficient or an expert, when you're at that level, you're kind of in a point of no return in some way. Like in terms of, you can weather almost anything from those levels.
Right.
Right, because even in our conversations about your trade, days that it's like that was ugly or sloppy, but you got yourself through it.
Yeah.
Those are really good examples of the difference between, something that looks in the quality of proficient and the quality of expert.
Yeah.
You have a greater chance of catching yourself and pulling yourself through when it's difficult at times.
You have true resilience at that point, and you know yourself deeply as a trader.
Right.
Yeah.
The keys to advancing through
Do you want me to
stages.
take over here? Sure. So keys to advancing through the stages. So beginning to begin. Discover and collect recipes or playbooks. Take classes, read the books, listen to the mentors, moderators, etc. in order to gain a database of proven trading strategies and plays. Begin using these. Rigorously follow recipes to build contextual situational awareness. As you develop awareness, of which recipes to use when, look for maxims to apply to your trading, and this is as you're moving into from novice to advanced beginner. Begin experimenting with the plays, with the strategies, with the rules, combining them or improvising, creating your own. And this is, work in the simulator, all of that, being willing to play with, okay, what works, what doesn't, if I follow this idea that I have, where will it lead me? Continue to reference materials, mentor sessions, etc. Allow yourself to make mistakes. Look for solutions that don't involve blaming the recipe. Seek out different sources of information to help. So as I look at all of these, this is the place of really embracing your identity as a student. This is the place of, I can't expect myself to know too much here, but I want to gain as much information as possible. I want to read as much as possible. I want to listen to others. Oftentimes when we're in this position, the tendency we have to stop listening to the people that actually know what they're talking about because we're jumping to our own idea. This is the place of really slowing down and trying to take in, what is it that I don't know here? What is it that this person knows that I have no clue about?
Forming your context.
Right, so practicing being a good student.
And we talked about taking emotional consequences, that last one, look for solutions that don't involve blaming the recipe. If you can catch yourself when you're about to blame the recipe and you're like, this is crap, and you stop yourself there and you can say, okay, what's happening for me emotionally?
Right.
Why didn't this work? And then even getting help, by being in mentor sessions and asking questions and kind of figuring out what went wrong with this.
And that last, asking questions, not just sitting in silence, thinking everybody else is getting this, why not? Why am I?
Sure.
Really reaching out, asking for help, sharing your frustration. Those are all ways to help you begin to advance to the next stage.
Yeah, oftentimes it is that self-criticism that is stopping you, that's making you blame the recipe because you don't want to say, somebody else gets it, but I don't get it, or somebody else is progressing and I'm not progressing.
Yeah, and I mean that's what the Warrior Pro Mentor sessions are for. They're specifically for you guys as students to come in and ask the questions that you have. Through my journey, I only at the very beginning did a little bit of recipe blaming. Because I pretty quickly, because I looked at what other people were doing, but I didn't really even understand the recipe. So I really very quickly just kind of started mixing my own. And then so a lot of the criticism was, you're an idiot, because it was I made the recipe and I failed. So you try to make a light bulb 150 times and you keep failing. You just I felt like the idiot. And I think that is also part of going through that. The ladder through competency is that self-criticism.
It is, and that when you're describing your own journey, it's like you kind of ratcheted up really quickly to the level of competent. Like you expected yourself to be at the competent level quickly.
But then I stayed there for years.
And
I wasn't. And you can, if a competent trader. I'm not sure that that's long-term profitable because it's a step forward, a step back, a step forward, a step back. It's not that you don't know how to make money, but you're not consistent.
Well, it's the place of, don't be afraid to be a student. Don't be afraid to learn from others. Think about how, more quickly you would have gotten there if you had Warrior Trading to go and be a student.
Right, and it comes back to Carl Rogers, and accepting where you are, and then you can make that change.
Right. You want to take this one?
Yeah, from advanced beginner to competent, begin to suss out what information is pertinent and applicable. Find a mentor who can provide rules and guidelines on what information to focus on. Relying on trial and error can be helpful, but without support, you may find yourself inclined to revert back to recipes. If you're not Ross. Because the reason people do that is it's a way of letting themselves off the hook emotionally if they feel overwhelmed. Restricting yourself in situations, that would be in the simulators. That's the playing pool thing that I talked about earlier. to only specific recipes or guides allows you a more intuitive understanding of what is and isn't relevant in novel situations. You will likely feel more when you succeed or fail because the trades are more your own. Accepting these consequences is necessary to develop an intuitive understanding of the trading process that is a critical aspect of competence, proficiency, and expertise in trading. So yeah, you feel it.
Right. Sure. So from competent to proficient, moving from this one stage to the other, you're more emotionally invested in outcomes that haven't fully internalized what data to focus on. You choose rather than intuit. And a thing that happens here, before I read the next point, it is so easy to succumb to exhaustion in this movement, because it is so much harder work. This is the place of trying to train that muscle memory so that these actions will be more intuitive. So again, a place that's really important to be kind to yourself as you're moving through that process. So keep up deliberate practice around what to focus on and goal setting, and assess the outcome in order to reach proficiency. This constant, it's like the compassionate evaluation, being really productively critical of what's going on. Let's see which one I had lost my track. Okay, as you improve at selecting what data and goals to focus on, you will slowly develop a more intuitive understanding of which decisions will do well and which ones won't.
Yeah.
And you'll move from competent to proficient.
Mm-hmm.
And remember that this is a gradual shift.
It is.
You can't do it as deliberately as you did the last three. Instead, you'll just wake up one day and realize you know what to focus on. So
what I sort of found for me was that, I was having a green day and then a red day.
Mm-hmm.
A green day and a red day. A green day, red day. Green day, red day. Then 2 green days and a red day.
Right.
And then a green day, red day, green day, red day. 3 green days and a red day. And then green, green, red, 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 green. And all of a sudden, a month went by, and it was like, wow, I'm really, this sort of approach of focusing on, the bigger percentage gainers. I did make some conscientious tweaks to the strategy before that happened, but it wasn't all at once. It was okay, it's getting a little better, a little easier, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, the last 3 months have been great.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm getting some time.
Yeah.
And then that stretch lasted a little longer, and then I had my first kind of big loss, and that one was scary because I felt right back the way I had been, a year before.
Right.
Like, am I back to square one?
Mm-hmm.
Does the strategy not work? And I had to kind of start over a little bit, back to basics, and follow the rules.
Right.
And again, it was a couple green days, red day, a couple green, red, and I started to rebuild.
Right.
Yeah.
And after falling and rebuilding a couple of times, I was like, okay, now I've got this.
Right.
And so it was sort of, it was August when I had that big loss, and then it was that September that I dialed in and really focused on the core of the strategy, and I started to make some headway. By December, I was doing well. It was the following spring, I had my first setback, and then by the end of that next year, I was like, I've had a year now of like, I've turned a profit.
Right.
Like, I'm getting this. But it sort of took that period of at least 6 months of doing relatively well to feel like I was, I guess from there, maybe transitioning from proficient to more.
Well, another thing I wanted to say about that is that's the time of really developing persistent patience.
Yeah.
So you're persistently working on, okay, I'm developing this, I'm moving forward, but staying patient with yourself. This is going to take the time that it takes.
It's, the 2 words for me were allowing and trust in that time period.
Right.
Allowing and trust.
Right.
Letting yourself feel into it and be there.
Yeah.
Well, and especially when you talked about, moving in that direction, and then you had that loss, and it felt like, am I going all the way back to the beginning?
Yeah.
It was actually then developing the capacity to really trust yourself.
To weather a storm. Yeah.
Right. Okay, I know what this is, I know what I'm doing, I just need to trust it and keep moving forward.
Yeah.
And look where it takes you.
And the worst thing that I could have done in those moments would have been to flail and to go back to this sort of to just fall totally into emotional trading.
Right.
Because then I could have, oh my God, I just lost this amount of money, I've got to get back as quick as I can. And then I kind of spiraled. And because of the work that you and I were doing on the emotional side, and the work that you guys as students are doing by going through this class, I was able to, after a couple days of kind of resetting, stay fairly centered, which was definitely required a lot more. I was more exhausting, a lot more energy to maintain that center, as I was kind of struggling to not feed into the thoughts of, I just had a good luck streak that was, gone now, and now it's all over, and all over means you're gonna have to go get a regular job, and just to not let myself go down all those beliefs and experiences and fears, which could then result in the action of impulsive trading.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So, when you
sure.
take this one.
Proficient to expert, you begin to intuit what to focus on and also how to execute the trade. Yeah. All aspects of trading will come to feel completely intuitive. That's like the pinnacle, right?
Yeah.
Like knowing your way around the place you grew up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You reach this stage through deliberate practice. You must keep experimenting and practicing and limiting yourself in order to see how different goals you intuitively set lead to different outcomes, until you can intuitively set the process as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you're developing that intuitive process.
Mm-hmm.
Practice following your instincts and seeing where they lead, and allow yourself to feel good or bad about the outcomes in order to learn the most from the experience. That doesn't mean to be caught in emotionality, to beat yourself up, but allow yourself to have the feelings you have and notice them. Mm-hmm. You have to let yourself be emotionally involved in the whole process in order to develop expertise. The move from proficient to expert will take the longest, so be patient with it, keep practicing, keep experimenting, and with time, you will develop the intuition you need.
Mm-hmm. And especially, with trading, because, you're never going to reach that place where you're trading at 100%. So being willing to meet all the emotions that come when you've had a setback, when you've made a mistake, when you've had the loss, being able to learn from, it's a continual learning process of, okay, evaluate what actually happened there. Was that just, the trade didn't go my way? Was I trading from some other place? Was I trading all of these emotions or, other situations in my life? And this is where we've talked about, treating all of this internal process as a relationship. It's not just a place where it's like, okay, I've arrived at being an expert and I'm just going to stay there, and it's all effortless. On any given day, what is the relationship I'm having with myself? What's the relationship I'm having with the market? And am I being truly present for all of it? Mm-hmm. That those are the best indicators of how successful ultimately you're going to be.
Yeah.
Right. The trust and the resilience are the real critical things that you're developing.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, which goes? You want me to do this one? Or you want to?
I'll read this.
Sure.
Thinking critically versus judgmentally.
Yeah.
Think critically about the data, information, and indicators.
Yeah.
Don't meet yourself or your mistakes with judgment. Try compassionate criticism instead, right? Which is honesty and empathy.
Right.
Consider how the way you meet yourself emotionally can support your trading or undermine it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important, because sometimes people feel like, oh, I can't just be easy on myself, or I don't want to be easy on myself, and they're not necessarily seeing that this is a key to moving forward.
Yeah.
Consider the exhaustion that comes from dogging and flogging yourself, which eventually leads to burnout. There may be some part of you that wants this, right? Like, this part of you that really believes this is the way you'll learn.
I only learn if I suffer.
Yeah.
Right.
Don't beat yourself up when things go wrong. Use it as data. The mistake you make today will feed a multitude of successes tomorrow. Hold your mistakes as investments in yourself and your development as a trader.
Yeah. And it's huge. It's so important, and it's not easy. And even myself, I can fall victim to that kind of habit of being overly judgmental of myself and critical of the trades that I take or the losses that I have. And it certainly, I haven't met a single trader who's been doing this for a long time who doesn't have days where they're off, and they have losses that they wish they didn't have.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I'm struck by in working with traders is the degree to which trading really demands that you have such a different level of relationship with yourself and your emotions.
Yeah.
There are so many other endeavors that aren't going to require of you that you meet yourself at this level. Trading is is very demanding in that sense. It really is asking you to meet yourself as your best self, and to really look into all of the different parts of you that need assistance in that, because all these emotions are going to come with trading. There's no way to avoid that. It's all about how you meet it.
Right. Yep. Is this the last
I
slide?
think that might be the last
so.
slide. All
Okay.
right.
All right, you guys. Well, we will give you guys a chance to take a break and see you back here for part 3.